Thank you. Hello, I'm Marze, a composer, vocalist, and conductor from Canton, Connecticut. I will be a senior at UConn this fall studying music. At the piano today is Ted Babbitt, who is also from Canton. He will be attending Mercer University in the fall studying organ performance and music ed. Is that right? We met in our various musical activities in high school, and I'm so glad we get to make some music for you today. So today I want to talk to you about art song. My passion is art song. The definition of art song is poetry set to music. That's kind of a broad definition, but that's because we have a lot of things that can fit into this box. The ensemble for art song is typically a singer, not amplified, so I'll sing out here, and then a piano, normally an acoustic piano, but today we have an electric one. Sometimes there can be instrumentalists, clarinet is pretty common, and even larger ensembles like orchestra. Again, the lines for this kind of music are quite blurry because art songs started in the Renaissance, when the piano wasn't even invented yet. And sheet music and language were also very different. So my training in classical voice includes singing poetry and music in English, German, French, Italian, and Spanish, and eventually Russian, but I'm kind of scared to sing in Russian, it's hard. The most common topics are, our favorites, love, nature, death, and music itself. They can be secular or religious. Now, these art songs are typically performed in a format called a recital, which is just like a performance of music, like a smaller format, different than a concert. A song cycle is a group of shorter songs meant for a performance in a recital. So it's like a 10 to 20 minute usually module that you can have, and then the audience will then applause afterwards, and that's sort of the way we do things. Doesn't have to be done that way, but that's the way we tend to do things. The texts in these song cycles are usually by the same or related poets, and the texts, when they're in this song cycle, can form a larger dramatic narrative when performed this way. So what's the draw to writing art songs as a composer? It's a small ensemble, so you would think that composers would want to write for the biggest, craziest sound ever, like an orchestra or something. But I love art song because I think the human voice is the most amazing instrument. A good composer will lead the listener to what the poem means through the musical ideas they choose. And because this ensemble is so small and intimate, you can really hear the transparency of those ideas. Our challenge as composers is to set the words on the page to rhythm in time. Not so hard if your poet's good. The interpretation is key. Music can absolutely change the meaning of a poem. My goal as a composer is to amplify the poet's intention and also play with time. I have the ability to make an audience experience a poem in the time I've allowed, and at the pace I've allowed, which is when you're reading a poem, you don't necessarily have control over. I mean, you can do things with spacing, and I'm not a poet, but you can do things with spacing or punctuation, the way you break the lines, but music allows you more control in this way. In all, I think art song is important to poetry because it means a whole recital hall full of people is experiencing a poem all at the same time in a drawn-out way with heightened emotions through the music. There are really few other ways to experience poetry like this. In a testament to the power of music and poetry, we're soon going to perform our first art song for you today. This song is called If I by Lori Laitman, a composer who often works in mediums such as song, opera, and choral works. She has hundreds of settings of poems. Very dear to her heart is settings of poems by those who perished in the Holocaust. She received her Master's of Music from Yale University, and our poet is a New England favorite, Emily Dickinson, who lived from 1830 to 1886 and was from Amherst, Massachusetts. Composers love her poems because they are, typically very short and also have a very compelling character. She's an interesting person, and we like a strong character. Before we begin, I'll read you the poem. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not An American poet who lived from 1884 to 1922. Her lyric poetry was known for its musical language and feminist tilt. The composer is John Duke, again an American composer who lived from 1899 to 1984. He mostly composed for the voice and was heavily influenced by German songs of the 19th century, which we call Lieder. It's spelled L-I-E-D-E-R, if you would like to learn more about that. Teasdale's poem is called Central Park at Dusk. It consists of 8 lines describing a silent night in winter, of course, at Central Park. I'll read you the poem. Buildings above the leafless trees loom high as castles in a dream, while one by one the lamps come out to thread the twilight with a gleam. There is no sign of leaf or bud, a hush is over everything. Silent as women wait for love, the world is waiting for the spring. Of course, silence is never really silence in music. When we experience silence in music, it can often be more dramatic than a loud sound, but composer John Duke interprets this as creating a glassy musical texture and mysterious quality with the piano accompaniment to mimic a quiet city, which you'll hear in a moment. Now, just to point out a thing. So Ted's Park has this interval, which we call a tritone, which can you just play that? Yeah, and then play it in a higher octave. Yes, very mysterious. That interval is kind of famous. It's in a lot of pieces to represent something mysterious or something evil, actually. So it's called the devil in music, although you can talk to me later about that. That's somewhat of a myth. Okay. Yeah. Other than myself. You may be either excited by the music you've heard or turned off. Either is fine and valid. If you're wondering how working with a composer like myself typically goes, I'd like to offer a few tips. First, you should know that composers have a hard time finding text to work with, so we need your help. Most composers tend to use texts that are in the public domain That is, the copyright has expired, and anyone is free to create what is called a derivative work. Poets who are deceased but whose work is controlled by a state, we tend to avoid because estates are difficult to deal with. The option I prefer is to work with currently living poets, because all I require in terms of copyright is just written consent to set their work to music. More importantly, and more interestingly, I like to ask questions about the poem, and I think it's really neat if they can hear the music that I've written. Poems that have an arc or story to them are usually the best when set to music. The momentum for music, it's hard if it just sits there. The momentum in the story has to have an arc, or it needs to crescendo, or it needs to decrescendo. Those are music terms, but you saw my hand movements. Okay. Another thing that singers love is a clear character. So imagine this. I'm here, well, this is a different setting, but if I'm going to walk into a recital hall in my big gown and my fancy shoes, we typically have to put on a character. If we're just singing it ourselves for an hour, we can't really pull it off because we're not Elton John. So we tend to come up with a dramatic character. We do all this work and acting stuff. So it's helpful if we have information in the poem or from the poet to help us with that. For example, I set some poems by Ginny Connors from her book about the Salem witch trials. As a singer, the songs were really fun because the characters were clearly defined. The voice of each character was different, which ended up limiting my options for musical material. But for a composer, we love limitations because they force our music to be coherent and just like makes sense. That song cycle I completed with Ginny's poetry is available on my YouTube channel if you'd like to take a listen. My name is just Sarah Marze, it comes up. Another thing that's important to note is the flow of the language. Economy of syllables is helpful when it comes to lyrics. Chewing on a bunch of consonants when singing is antithetical to that beautiful, smooth vocal line us singers study for our whole lives to create. Related to flow is the length of your phrases. I like to define a musical phrase as one idea or fragment of text you can perform within a single breath. This will depend on the speed of the music, which we call tempo, but you can check the length of your phrases by speaking very slowly. If, in this slow motion voice, you can get through your whole poem without adding commas or breaths in awkward places, it will probably translate to singing quite well. So, prose can indeed be set to music. It just still needs to be coherent when it's broken up into those stretched out musical phrases. Some composers enjoy rhyme, but sometimes I find it limiting to work with. So I would say rhyme scheme does not matter. If there's a strong meter, that of course has an effect on the rhythm of the resulting song. In speech, we have strong and weak syllables. In musical meter, we also have strong and weak beats. Musical meter is simply how we describe the recurring patterns that organize time. Sort of the same thing in poetry, right? Therefore, the pattern of the strong and weak syllables in a poem, which we call scansion, will directly impact the rhythm of the resulting song. That is, if your composer is any good. A good composer will work with the natural rhythm of the language. Of course, what I've said today is only guidelines for what tends to work, but I've certainly been creative with non-traditional texts. So it's just something to keep in mind if you are looking to send poems to a composer or talk with a composer. So, what brings me here to you all today? You may have seen the emails, but I'm working on an idea grant with UConn. It's a funded research project. It is a songbook for high school students called Let Us Sing Contemporary Art Songs for Young Singers. There were 6 poets from this society that were chosen as the text for these songs. They're all beautiful poems. I read so many that were really beautiful, but it's just, I picked the poems based off of just if I heard music right away. So, completely subjective. So, this project will have 6 songs, all to a different ability level and voice type for high school students, and we'll also have a lot of pedagogical materials like practice tracks, like poetry analysis guides, things like that, worksheets. So we're going to now read the poems, and then I will invite you to clap after each one. I will have some poets come up. I have the poems printed out here. It may be too small, so bring your glasses, but they have them here. Okay. Our first one is by Jenny Connors. I'm going to read this a little funny because I just set this to music, so this tune is stuck in my head, so I apologize if it sounds weird. It's a beautiful poem, I promise. This poem is Trying to Teach Travis. On his arm, he's drawing 2 snakes. His fingers are busy and green. His beautiful eyes are great salt lakes, and his mind is a submarine. His fingers are busy and green, and I ask for his homework in vain. This boy's mind is a submarine, and his book was left out in the rain. I ask for his homework in vain. His sister ran off last night, and his book was left out in the rain. He says there was some kind of fight. His sister ran off last night. He's pouring a puddle of glue. He says there was some kind of fight, but the things that were shouted aren't true. He's pouring a puddle of glue. His beautiful eyes are great salt lakes, and the things that were shouted aren't true. On his arm, he's drawing 2 snakes. I love Jenny's poetry, it just sings. Our next poem is by Mary Cook. Is she in the room today? Okay. Well, we'll still give her a round of applause. This poem, okay. That's fine, okay. So this poem is called Hush. When birdsong twitters in the trees, hush, listen. When tender rain fills easy breeze, hush, listen. When crickets scrape and locusts jabber, bullfrogs belch and tree toads tease, hush, listen. When children dance in bubbling joy, giggle at your giddy sprees, hush, listen. When silence swells the space around, don't fear, but use this precious ease to hush, listen. When quarrels hover, battles loom, and undermine your wish to please, hush, listen. When muted sighs leak into air with prayers of sufferers on their knees, hush, listen. When troubles tremble at your feet, go to the hills where comfort frees. Hush, listen. We'll give her a round of applause. Our next poem is by Jack Sheedy, who's here today. Would you like to come up? This poem is called If You Go Outside to a Cat. I think it was one of the first poems I received, and I immediately was like, yes, we're doing this one. So come on up. I have the poem printed out here.
That's it. It's bigger.
Is that big enough?
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. This is not perfect.
I got it. Okay, here you go. Just speak really close into it because it doesn't pick it up really easily.
Okay, thank you. This poem was inspired by a French song, Ne me quitte pas. And it's, the English translation is If You Go Away, which roughly translated is Don't Leave Me. And Barbra Streisand and other people sing it. So I don't know if you realize that, but...
I'll make sure to quote that in the song.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. If you go outside to a cat, if you go outside, will you wander far? Will I think you've died underneath a car? Will you hunt for food and get killed by beasts just because you don't like your fancy feast? Will you rub your fur on a pile of sticks and come running home with 100 ticks? If you go outside, if you go outside, if you go outside. But if you stay in, I'll never be bitter. I'll sift out your poop. I'll change your litter. I'll toss the old food. I'll end your famine. No more beef and gravy. I'll give you grilled salmon. And if that's not enough, I'll open the door and let you decide not to stay anymore. If you go outside. If you go outside. If you go outside. If the door is shut and you howl at me, and I open it and you scowl at me. Yes, it's open wide, but you sit and stare, and I wonder why you're still sitting there. Have you changed your mind? Did you realize that it's cold out there, that it's no great prize if you go outside, if you go outside, if you go outside, if you go outside and have second thoughts, and you want to show me a mouse you've caught, limp and lifeless now, that had tried to flee, and you want to say it's your gift to me, then I'll let you in, back inside the house. Yes, I'll let you in, but let's ditch the mouse. If you go outside, if you go outside, if you go outside, oh, just go outside.
To musical structure with repetition. That's another thing composers love. So, thank you. Hilarious. Okay, our next poem is by Susan O'Ned. She would like to come up. Make sure you speak really close.
Okay. So this poem is called One Life, and it's written in tribute to a gym teacher friend, Michelle Hespler. Michelle has a gym in East Hartford where she helps others with Parkinson's. And Yale University right now is doing an intensive study because what she has developed in her program is actually delaying the progression of Parkinson's. So Michelle Hespler. Okay, is that a little better?
Yeah.
Okay. So check Michelle Hespler if, online. So this is a tribute to her because Michelle's theme is called One Life, Live It. That's the theme that she uses in her gym. One life. One life. Just gotta live it. Hold on, hold tight, don't try and spin it. Because life moves in a sphere, in a flow, don't you know? Keep your stride, ride the tide, catch the wave. It'll take you out or take you in. Bring you to shore, start where you are. Sand in the face, no disgrace, because you can't lose. Nothing left but your soulful self. So stand up, get in the fight for your life. One life, live it. Thank you.
A beautiful poem, thank you. Our next poem is by Melanie Greenhouse. I'd like to introduce her to the microphone. Yeah, come on.
Thank you, Sarah. This is just such an amazing project, and I'm so pleased and excited to be part of it. The poem that she selected was inspired, sadly, by the images I saw of the Ukrainian children fleeing. So it's called To All the Children Flee. Sometimes the winds of war will blow, and the rage of angry bombs will land on the place that you called home. And as you run through the rubble and cry and say goodbye to the ones who created you, you are swept into clouds of smoke. Now, no one to guide you. Now, your whole world changed. I am not one who prays to the gods who would inflict this kind of hell on earth. But now I pray with all my heart that you arrive by foot or train in a land of loving arms where no more harm will tear your flesh or crush your bones or shatter your tender innocence.
Thank you, Melanie, for submitting that. And it's just going to be a beautiful addition to the book. I think that will live beyond the book, so thank you. Our last poem is by Sandy Carlson, and she's going to come up and read it, I believe. Sandy? Oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah. and then I will sing it after.
All right, how's that back there? We good? Yeah. Awesome. Hey, I'm old. I gotta take this out, okay? Yeah, go ahead. It's bad. And these don't work much. All right, this is called Dust. This is a pandemic poem for my daughter, Adela, another musician. All right. Okay, Dust. The residue of time settled into the crevices of home. Letters and autographed books, charms on necklaces, greeting cards from men whose names are lost to time. Generations of these spelling out for your heart the facts of others' lives. It won't be gotten rid of. Both finite and infinite, it wills its story into your being, reminding you you are a part of a long story you will come to know in rituals that include honoring these treasures and moving on with mourning, slicing apples, toasting bread, sitting on the back porch, watching the birds you just fed take off, hearing them sing to you and to each other, affirming the fact of being alive, satisfied with others or their kind and others again, as you gaze into the universe of treetops. Listen to them sing your story.
Thank you, Sandy. Nice to meet you. Heard about you. Okay, so here's where we'll be performing the first draft of Dust. You'll notice a few lines are omitted. This is something the composers have to do based off of how long sometimes music just takes a while. And, well, I don't want to have our high school singers up here for like 5 minutes. So 3 to 4 minutes is sort of our typical length for an art song. But I hope you still will enjoy my interpretation.
Moving on with morning, slicing apples, toasting bread,